Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Winston Yo, president of the AIA Hong Kong chapter. And this is the first of our Inspire series, where we're looking at architecture from a broader perspective to try and see architecture and its importance through the lens of other fields and disciplines. For our first speaker, we have Shirley Surya. She is the curator for M+ Design and Architecture. Thank you for joining us, Shirley.
Thank you for inviting. Thank you.
So you titled this talk on curation as knowledge production. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, please don't consider the bombastic word. You know, there's a reason why I had to use that word, because I think oftentimes the notion of exhibitions is often kind of caught up with the idea of spectacular immersion, object-based and just, you know, experience. So I think I was reacting against that sort of exhibitions or exhibiting architecture in that way. And so I just came up with this. So I think, yeah, I came up with, so yeah, this slide is pretty much what I'll be sharing with you today. The 4 exhibitions, which I hope will be able to communicate what I mean by curating architecture as knowledge production. Again, I describe this as a very personal methodology because I'm not saying that this is the way to go. It's based on my own conviction. Exhibitions are highly resource heavy, and I don't believe that we should make exhibitions just for the sake of glorification. It has to have a degree of, you know, all these values here that I'm sharing here. So the notion of self-reflectivity is very key, because oftentimes for retrospectives of exhibitions, it's often done as a trajectory of success. So I think when I was involved in this project with Chang, he gave me the, I guess, kind of like the license to just like, okay, please help me slice the project in a way that, or slice my practice in a way that would be able to communicate certain values that are important about the practice, but also that would resonate with with the questions that society is facing or what the practice is facing.
Wait. Slow down. So before we get into Yonghong Chang, for everyone who doesn't know, yeah. Shirley's actually profession started out as an architect or an architecture student, and so yeah, that's how you segue into Yonghong Chang. And for those who don't know, can you share that story a little bit?
Oh, right. Okay. So, all right. So yes, please. This is going to be so casual. You can stop me anytime you want. So just keep the prompts. So I obviously was not dragged. Okay, how about this? My dear sister is an architect. A whole bunch of her friends in RISD. They were on RISD. I was helping her. I was visiting her, and then everybody said, "Shirley, are you choosing an undergraduate degree? You know, why don't you just choose architecture for fun?" And so I just like, right, for fun. Okay, sure. I just went to NUS, that was in Singapore, somehow passed the, you can say, the aptitude test, even though I'm not very good at drawing and all that, but somehow got in. Maybe there was the interview and how I talk about cities and all that. But I think I realized, of course, after about 6 months, you know, the program in Singapore is very British based. So you actually went in straight 6 months, you know, just architecture, there's nothing else. So you were kind of like immersed enough to know whether you are really suitable for it or not. And I have to say that I did well with my studio and everything else, but I did really badly for a structures class. I failed. So in Singapore, if you fail your structures class for the first year, you got to redo the whole year.
Oh, gosh.
So I knew that like, this is not for me. I think, I don't think I'm a good designer in that sense, because I'm also not very visual. I'm actually more about ideas and writing. I love all the articles I have to read. I love the idea of like connecting architecture with every aspect of society, whether it's politics, you know, culture and all of that. And I think, so I was more interested in the stories, even though I could see and its impact.
And that's often the best part anyway. I mean, I think a lot of us got into architecture because we fall in love with the conversations around architecture, not just the building per se.
Yeah, it's a myth, right? Like, actually, I mean, it's a nice myth, yeah, but actually,
it's something we chase.
Yeah, but at the same time, I was also highly fascinated with and very impressed with the complexity of producing architecture. It's something, even as a curator, that I felt we need to bring that out and differentiate it, like from.
But how did you go from architecture student to curating your first?
So on my last day of packing my studio stuff, there was a tutor who came up to me. "Oh, I heard that you're leaving." And I said, "Yes." And I said, "So what are you going to be studying?" "Oh, I'm going to go back to my first love, which is media studies." I was really into film and advertising and just movies and all that sort of thing. So he said, oh, media studies, don't worry, Shirley, you're going to come back to somehow the media world, and architecture is going to meet one day. So I don't really understand that at that point, but I think after going through media studies in Berkeley, I just knew that architecture itself is a medium. It's a medium like in which things speak, but there's also a whole lot of mediating to do with architecture, whether it's a magazine, whether it's publishing, whether it's a school or whatever institutions or museums. These are all mediating architecture in different ways, the stories of architecture. So naturally, my first internship was with Dwell magazine in San Francisco. And so at that point, so writing about architecture was naturally part of it. And then when I went back to Singapore after that, I also was doing design journalism, architecture and design or journalism. But as I was writing, I realized that I did not know why I call something as good design. What is good? What is the criteria? And what is the criteria and how did the criteria come about? So naturally, there's a question of historical inquiry. So I wanted to do history, but history of what? I didn't go straight to history of architecture. I wanted to do history of design because I was also interested in the whole gamut of design production, not just architecture, but down to graphic and all that. So I did history of design in RCA in London, and then focusing on architecture history in socialist China. So that was my thesis. So that's how it started. But of course, RCA program was very much connected to the V&A Museum. So the idea of studying history of design in light of curatorial work within a museum collecting institution was part of it. But the job there's hardly any job in that sense. So because there are very few institutions who does this kind of thing. So that's what led me to Beijing. And after Beijing, this post in M+ came up out of the blue, which is like an amazing one. Finally, there's a museum in Asia that actually cares about design and architecture. So I just applied. And I got it, even though I didn't have the practical experience as a curator, but it was an opportunity that I just took up. I guess it was a chance given by Lars Nitve, our director. And at that point, Tobias Berger was also the person who hired me in that sense. So that's how it started.
I see. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, so tell us a little bit about the first show that we're gonna see.
Okay, so just before that, Winston, I will just share these words about, again, back to your first question about knowledge production. So as I mentioned, Yuhong Chang, I hope to address the notion of self-reflexivity, the idea of like there is a need for exhibitions to create a shift in perception or assumption of things, or even a reinterpretation of things, or even a sense of social advocacy. I think this is all, I believe that every exhibition, or I guess any sort of content, especially exhibitions, need to be able to craft this message and understand like why now, why is it important? And then the other one is about okay, so as a historian, I'm not a curator in a kind of like a spectacular sort of way. I'm more of a historian by training, and so I really care about bringing up stuff that are non-canonical, that are not part of the existing text. I'm interested in the big picture, but I'm interested in the geeky ones, like the micro histories of things. So I want to be able to bring that together. Multiplicity is key. So yeah, just being able to see something, see architecture as through the eyes of artists, movies, historians, sociologists, whatever that is, that interdisciplinarity is very important. So that, again, multiple lens. And then the other one is seeing design in its process throughout production. Mediation here means how it's communicated through by authors, by films, consumption even. What does the audience or the real estate developers or the users actually think or use this building? And then the last one is about this idea of flow, that we are not essentialists in some sense, or think that we are ourselves, but we are part of this larger fabric. So we always have to think in this larger network of ideas, agents, and objects. So that's how I personally would like to approach curating in that sense. So these are just examples that I have been very thankful that I got opportunities to do and practice these values, I guess. So yeah. So I shall share the first one. Okay.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
I think I guess we'll come back to some of these terms as we go through your presentation tonight. Yes,
of course. And also, I think, please let me know if I'm going, too fast or too slow, or time is running up. I tend to get caught up with this, so remind me.
Yep, I will. I'll do my best.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, this is again, just if you were in Beijing in 2012. So I just, I pretty much did this project while I was starting up M+ to finish it. I did it for about 8 months, and then I came to Hong Kong, finishing up the text for the exhibition. And then it opened in almost September. And then I think at that point, so I just wanted to share why I ended up with that project. Okay, this is really fast. So first of all, as I mentioned, my thesis project in RCA, ooh, this thing runs on its own. I wonder what I should do that stops it.
Is it?
Let me see. Hold on.
Is it a PowerPoint?
Yeah, it's a PowerPoint, but it shouldn't be running on its own, right? So let me just try again. Okay, so hopefully it doesn't move. So just it moves. Hold on.
Or just quit it and do the thumbnail.
Yeah, I'll just do this. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Then it will not kind of run on its own.
I think you can click the little triangle on the top left and minimize the ribbon.
Okay, 1 second.
Top right.
Yeah. Is this okay?
Yeah, good.
Yeah. So I just wanted to share that Yong-Ho Chang was was one of the case studies I studied for my thesis, and my thesis was at that point was about comparing so-called independent architects with state architects in China, and how the difference actually bring out the values in which how the architectural institution actually chooses to position architecture in a particular way. And it's all about autonomy, it's all about authorship, and it's also about a sense of yeah, I guess you can say autonomy and like authorship is a very key aspect of it. And so as I was studying about his practice, I realized that, oh, wow, this is like great that he is not just an architect that is building big buildings, but very humble buildings. Nobody knew about this anymore now. The Morningside Center for Mathematics in Beita. So and I had to go there and see it, what's so different, and how come he can build this in the late 90s, and why did he build like a bookstore that is made up of bicycle shelves, because it used to be a place for parking bikes. And then why is he involved in exhibitions with artists, like how come an architect in China was able to engage with these things? So that was my question in my paper. And so when I had, you can say, no job in London, I just felt like I just needed to get my hands dirty on archives. And so I just wrote to him and said, give me whatever time. You don't need
so you self-initiated this?
Of course. I mean, yes, I have to go and like tell him like,
amazing.
I just I just want to be able to you don't need to pay me even, I said. I just want to go and deal with the archives. I just wanted to get, get into like primary documents, right? And so he said, okay, it's a very good timing. I'm doing a retrospective with UCCA at Woodlands Center for the Arts and a book at the same time. And so please come over. I went, and then I was amazed at these materials that I saw again in the 1980s. So this is actually done when he was still a student, but also when he was, kind of half teaching between Berkeley and Rice, and also there's another school I forgot already. But so you can tell, like, what is he thinking? So the notion of, I think, I guess he was heavily influenced by the notion of like narrative architecture in that sense, and what it means for the figure or the story to be part of the embodiment of the space. And then also kind of a very inward looking, a very kind of seeing how does the emotions get transposed in the space or in this visualization of space. So you could tell like what's going on in him, this tranquility on the lake, and then underneath is like all these roots tangled up, so I just like, so just so much, I felt and so even this notion of like earth house, again, he didn't build anything. He was just exploring it by drawings, using watercolor, about the idea of rammed earth and the idea of what does it mean to also build something that's like a very cave-like, a very cavernous inside. And so I just felt like, wow, this is a very, thank you for letting me access this. So I just wanted to, oops, okay. So I don't want to show too much, but this is basically where I ended up. So all these little squares are basically all the materials that I saw in his archive. So you could tell, all these little sketches like rare window, voyeuristic theater, kindergarten window, UCB gate, because he went to UC Berkeley, upside down office. So everything from his sketches, his drawings, to his early projects, to whatever that he had already done by 2012, I put it all, I was trying to pretty much digest them. And then from there, he said, okay, not him, actually his wife, 你帮我把这些都串在一起. So if you know what the word 串is, a wonderful character, right? It's like a satay stick almost. And so he said like 2 cubes, and then you put a stick through it. Chuan. And so this is my Chuan, right? My attempt, I guess, to kind of organize all his practice into 6 themes. So I just want to share again the idea of like, and these themes, of course, was not very. It took a while to get here after about 3 reviews with him. You can imagine, you know, an architect who wants to do his own show, he wants to project something about himself. But then I was thankful that at least he was willing to accept how I choose to frame his practice in these ways. So the first one is really about materiality, right? Locality, ecology, redefining use. Second one is how the body, he always look at the body and the sense of inhabitation. And the third one is about visual play. There's always a sense of play about what you can see, what you cannot see, and what's underneath. And then it's about time. Stitching time here has got to do with like, he always refers to history, but at the same time, there's this continuity between the now and the past. It's nothing really kind of like the classics belongs there, you know, but he kind of brings it in again by reinterpretation. And then the notion of the more than its parts, like the building as an urban kind of like, again, this is not new. A lot of architects have this idea, but for him, microurbanism was a very key aspect of his work. And then the last one, which I inserted, which he didn't expect, was that you are more than just practicing architecture. I think your project was really impacting what's happening in society, that really is stimulating cultural production at the same time, and trying to communicate architecture as more than just the built, but as part of a cultural discourse, like a redefining of what ideologically China could be, especially this is like late 80s, early 90s. He was part of that circle of artists and so a lot of these projects are actually done together with artists. And you know, I'll show another project later. And so it even up until now, he's involved in theater production, involved in exhibitions, involved in filmmaking. So that part of the practice needs to come out. I said, you cannot just talk about the architecture, but also about these aspects. So that's how I was also trying to be true to who he is, because all these are quotes, the one in blue here. I really read all his writings to be able to really kind of align also about what he is, so that I'm not just making him up in that sense. So I guess that's what I was trying to do. I guess you can say trying to attempt of a faithful analysis and reflection of a practice. But I think the title, he came up with the title as Materialism without a hyphen. I added the hyphen because I wanted to tell him that, like, you know, let's do a double play on the meaning, because at this point, architecture is often looked at as materiality, like a material girl, material culture. Like it's about the rich, it's about big bombastic buildings and like trying to show off, you know. But then at the same time, your idea of materialism is not that, you know, it's about materiality and looking at the pragmatic kind of like nature of architecture without this whole like kind of like iconic or symbol of architecture as object and money. So that's the whole, I guess you can say, negotiate and discussion with Yung Ho about the title also, to be able to even insert a kind of value about what architecture should be and can be. So yeah, so this is just part of that process.
A quick question. When you were doing this, how much of this was present versus in retrospect?
Sorry, present what again?
How much of this was present during the process or in retrospect when you look across the body of work that the theme emerges?
Oh, so you're asking how this process of me coming up with these themes are still being used by me now?
No. I'm asking when you delve into all the material.
Yeah.
Of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the 6 themes, you said you added 1 theme, but of the other 5, how many of these themes were actually I mean, they were all there in the work, of course, but how many of them were actually articulated?
Okay, all of them. So I will
all of them were articulated. Okay.
Yes. Thankfully, it was. So again, I just show this is the. I mean, again, I just took picture of what was printed in the UCCA exhibition as a part of like my, I guess you can say, what we are trying to say. So I just highlighted the part that I wrote that I said, you know, it is not a trajectory of success. It is an exploration, objectively informed, subjectively fueled. So it's always this tension that I want to bring up as well in Yung Ho's practice, that it's neither this nor that. And it's this kind of polarities that are often existing in society that I felt need to be kind of like, yeah, put together, because, and he happens to also be like that, you know, like you can be practical and be fantastical at the same time. And that is the diversity of what humanity is. And so that's I guess that's the kind of how I choose to communicate these values. And so these are the six themes. So some of them are actually combined into one, but they're all there. Winston. So at the moment, yeah, because I think they were looking at the space, and the 6 is actually something that actually works, because eventually I will show this is how the whole thing is planned. So by this point, of course, the design team came in and they make most of the decisions about how do we display the object, how do we divide the spaces, and this use of all these material, like from plaster to concrete to rammed earth. Yeah, this is all by Keith Tam and his team, one architect from Singapore as well. So this is what it was. And so yeah, so I think this is again, I think all these details by the time I was already in M+, but it was really more of a conceptual framework that I contributed to. And then yeah, even including this project was what I pushed for. So this project initially called 这个退着平门, right? Pull and yeah, it's like a sliding folding swing door. Was actually part of an exhibition, a very key one in 1998. This is where Cao Changdi, before it even became Cao Changdi as an like artist village, he was already being part of it. And basically this door can shut completely and disappear, but it can become a door at the same time. And so I don't have all the pictures here, but we basically reconstructed this door for the exhibition as part of his as part of him being a very key member of this artistic society, artistic circle, and also contributing to cultural discourse and not just architectural discourse. So that's how, and then his film is projected outside of this door, yeah, within the room. I mean, so yeah, that's it for Yung-Ho Chang, Winston.
Very cool. Thanks. So coming back to today, we're very excited that M+ is, it's been a long time coming, and it's finally close to opening, right? If you look at M+ and M+ mission then and now, has anything changed, and how do you see it? Because I think I remember when it first came out almost a decade ago, the whole museum scene is very different, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Thankfully, I think I think there's a reality of grounds shifting and institutions changing, of course, but at the same time, there's also you can say a clarity of our goal and our positioning. So the goal of us being a museum for visual culture from day one, and again, I think if those who doesn't know, M+ has a white paper. And if you were to Google M+ in 2012, there was a white paper written by the Museum Advisory Group about what M+ should be. And that is pretty much, you can say, the tenets of what M+ is. And we have been, and in some ways, yeah, very true to it. So that paper actually addresses the disciplines that we have to cover or represent in our museum collection. It addresses how the notion of visual culture means that you addresses both high and low. It has talk about how this should be accessed by the public, at the same time, like encouraging different communities, things like that. So in that sense, it has not changed in terms of its remit. And I think some of the key remits here is like one, which is interdisciplinarity. So at the moment, visual art, architecture and design, and moving image continues to be the main kind of you can say, silo disciplines that we want to invest on. At the same time, the notion of popular culture, which is a Hong Kong visual culture, cuts across those three. So we still want to put a very important aspect of Hong Kong. At the moment, there's a team called Hong Kong Visual Culture, but they have to cut through all the disciplines. And so in their shows or exhibitions, they have to address all of that. So we try to have these silo and like focus, but at the same time also create this lateral, you can say, transversal sort of approach. So that has become much more stronger over time, because that's also, but it was not easy. It was not easy to be able to have a dialogue between art and architecture without compromising or diluting each of them. That requires time to really know how you create a constructive or productive dialogue. You can't just mix things. So that has taken time, but we are getting there. We've gotten there, and I'm just really grateful for it, because there was a time when it was really hard for art, like they think that architecture was this and art was that. And so, but now we are slowly able to kind of consider that, they all have their own place. And they can still contribute to the same thing. They can enrich a dialogue and an understanding of reality or society. So of course the collection has grown tremendously for the last 10 years and much more diverse. Geography-wise also haven't changed. Our transnational approach is very important. It's not just something that Hong Kong is no longer something insular. Hong Kong has always been part of a larger kind of like a network of multiple centers in the world. So And it's not just part of East Asia or mainland. We see Hong Kong as part of, yeah, a greater kind of global, but also a greater region. So that hasn't changed as well. And that has informed the way we collect as well. So yeah, that's kind of...
Okay.
I know you have a question about the building and the collection, but you want me to address it now or later?
I think you're going to show us something on the M+ mission. I could ask that now or afterwards.
Yeah, I think your question naturally relates to what M+ is. And so I just share about this exhibition. Some of you may have seen it in 2014 at Artistry. And so this exhibition is pretty much a result of, you can tell, okay, basically the reason why we were able to have this exhibition was because we were able to push not just to market the building that got chosen for the competition, but push for the fact that there is content to do with architecture in M+ as well. So that's how we push for it. And we are able to almost put this together in 8 months of collecting. And so that was how this this exhibition came together, is really not just talking about the 6 entries for the competition for M+, and also the process in which HDM actually arrived at this design, but also to do with what we are collecting of architecture and our position on architecture.
I think the question we were talking earlier on is whether or not, typically as architects, we deal with a program or a building, right? One usually comes first, whether the program comes and fits the existing building, or we build a building around an established program. But in the case for M+, both of them sort of started at the same time in tandem. Yep. So yeah. I was curious about the relationship between the collection and the building. Yep. What was the was there a dialogue as the process evolved?
Yeah, so I just wanted to, it's a very key one because I think it's not so much known that HDM's, so first of all, I was involved in the writing of the competition brief, and in our discussion of what is in this brief, we had to emphasize again that we are, number one, a multidisciplinary museum. So we don't have just works that are of art that are exhibited, but even if they are works of art, we already have the SICK collection announced at that point, and we already acquired it. And so the nature of the SICK collection of Chinese contemporary art since the 80s were already very obvious. And so an example is this. So in the brief, we actually already was very clear that we want to have diverse gallery spaces. We don't want just white cubes. And the reason for that is also we actually put a very good example, like we want industrial galleries. Why do we ask for an industrial gallery? Was because majority of the Chinese contemporary artwork were produced in warehouses, huge warehouses in China. And so what would actually allow for these things to be exhibited in an environment that is closer to where it used to be? That's why we asked for it. And that's why I guess the brilliance or the genius of HDM in understanding what industrial here means in Hong Kong, especially not in Hong Kong, but the M+ site. M+ site is a reclaimed land. There's nothing industrial about it. It's kind of like a piece of like a clean slate. And so that's why they dig a little bit more and say, okay, it's not so much industrial, but it's infrastructural because of the kind of like the Airport Express Railway and the bunker line. So they saw a photo of the construction of the airport railway, and there's this bunker kind of like a space, and they said we can recreate that as though it's a parallel to what is in that site, which is the Airport Express Railway. But at the same time, being able to create a post-industrial space for what we require, for the kind of artwork that we require. And so that's an example of actually addressing the design of the galleries in light of the collection. So that's just. And of course, we ask for other aspects, can we view art that is from this part of the world in a different way, like that is not white cube. So they really try to consider other ways in which it's going beyond the white cube, even though the white cube is still majority of the galleries. So yeah, hopefully that addresses your question, Winston, on collection and building. Yes, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Then how do you actually showcase? I see over here. I didn't attend the exhibition myself, but how do you plan and showcase ideas?
What ideas? Which ideas? So plenty of ideas.
Specifically.
Oh, okay. So let me just share about this exhibition then. I think the notion of ideas, everything is about ideas, but there are particular ideas that we want to convey in this exhibition. So I guess moving on from the exhibition of, so this will also kind of address the collection of how, the question of how we built the M+ architecture collection. And so you can, yeah, this is again, for those who've been there, these three drawings that you see in front of here are basically Frank Lloyd Wright's Imperial Hotel plans and elevations and sections, and they're fragments. They're not, we didn't acquire the entire thing. They're from the market, and only 7 were available, and we took it up because of timing. And we thought, why do you acquire Frank Lloyd Wright? Somebody had asked us. There's something to do with Hong Kong, and that's when we have to kind of assert again: is M+ just acquiring Hong Kong materials? Is M+ just a Hong Kong museum? Is Hong Kong just a Hong Kong thing, or is Hong Kong also part of a larger thing? So for us, again, back to the transnational approach was very key. Hong Kong as a gateway, Hong Kong as a hub, and how this notion of like transnational production is, our transcultural kind of production has to be reflected in the works. And so we thought Imperial Hotel as a hotel in the late 1925, as early as that, and having Frank Lloyd Wright having to kind of have this kind of like cross-continental project as early as that was an example of that. An example of learning from what is the availability of labor, as well as materials that would actually require him to change his design drawings that he did in Chicago. So is this sort of like story and lesson that we want to be able to reflect by acquiring these materials? So that's kind of like an example, but at the same time, this exhibition was focusing on those subjects that are representing of a larger narrative, but we also focus on 2 other subjects, which is basically, okay, I will just skip this. This is basically our statement on collecting architecture with postcards of different works. And then, yeah, this theme here on the right are basically the narrative that we wanted to focus on, that we begin. I'm not saying that they are like the final, but the idea of cross transfers is very important for us. So meaning that, so I'll show you more examples of that theme. Urban laboratory, placemaking, they're quite broad, but critical futures was already starting then, because we really want to be able to build a collection of architecture that is really to do with the fantastical, undoable, unbuilt, because we are just too realistic as a society here. We want to be able to kind of encourage collecting works that are really stretching a little bit of your imagination. So we built that, and then digital reality, yeah, it's basically what is actually mediated through the digital medium. And so this is an example of that, as I mentioned, for Frank Lloyd Wright. So this is actually an article that was published by Ming Bao, and we were very thankful that they were actually interested in our stories and really wrote a really great piece about telling us about what does it mean from a perspective of Asia. So Yazhou Shedian. So it's not just about Hong Kong, but we are actually part of this larger kind of fabric of Asia. And then this is an example of cross transfer. So we, of course, again, I think I have to tell people that like collecting is a whole big challenge. Sometimes you want something, you can't find it. Sometimes you didn't expect to get it, but it's somehow landed on your lap. And something like this, like a Mies sketch of the courthouse, somehow landed on our lap. And of course, we took it up, and we have to ask ourselves, how does this relate to a larger thing about Hong Kong and Asia? And there's no doubt about it, because the notion of the courthouse is influential, highly influential, and not only that, it's going to be able to dialogue with the notion of the Chinese courtyard house as well. So that's why we put Jackson Wong, which is the founder of Wong and Ouyang's university drawing in HKU 1950s, next to this purposely, be able to create that dialogue of like influences. And so that's what we meant by cross transfers, and it continues to be a very important way or an approach in which we collect. We don't just collect things that are from Asia, we collect, by Asian architects, we collect architects who are working in Asia and how they have also influenced an entire discourse on tropical architecture. This is like way in the 80s in Jakarta, Indonesia, for Wisma Dharmala Sakti. So again, this is landed on our lap. Like, it's not easy to find these things anymore, but we somehow managed to get it. And then, of course, we also focus on like really the firms that were very important in Hong Kong since you can say early 60s. And this is when urban development grew in such a way that opportunities were given for these architects to build something that up until today still have its impact, kind of lasting impact. So whether it's an infrastructure, okay, some of these have been demolished already, but we also kind of bring up those that are still around. And so again, we were like, why are we interested in pedestrian movement plan for Tai Kushing? Like for us, we were interested in that because it's just got to do with what it means to transform an entire dockyard into a city within a city. And so these aspects of planning are just as much an important aspect that we should display and collect. A model about a container house, about logistics, right? So this is what Hong Kong is about. Architects don't just design things that are like signature, but also infrastructure. They are very much part of that. So we want to be able to also pay tribute to that. And also Rocco's Hollywood Terrace. People may not like the design of it, but actually the thought about what it means to bring the traffic of human between two sides of two streets within one complex was something that we think about, like how do you still create connectivity within this very dense environment. So these are just examples in which we begin our collection on Hong Kong architecture. And of course, like Kowloon Walled City was a very main part of it, but then we also move on to the generation of architects in China. But of course, there's also a matter of convenience. Convenience here means to collect something and acquire something from people is also based on trust. We were a museum that has no building, just started for a year. So all of these that we acquire is pretty much based on a very personal trust between the curator and the architect. And so for us to be able to acquire these drawings and models of Stephen Hall's project in Beijing, at the time of this Olympic boom kind of period, that was what we are focusing on for mainland China. And so these were, but of course we would also to know that Hong Kong architects no longer keep models because there's no space, especially for old projects. We have to recreate the peak. MoMA may not agree with the idea of acquiring reproduction, but for us, we kind of went beyond that convention and just say it's so important to be able to communicate a building through this medium. And so we reconstructed with the advice of Zheng Wanan, who sadly already passed away, to be able to make this building based on photographs of the old model. And same goes for Palmer and Turner's powerhouse or substation. It was really based on Jim's and advice in making this. And so even archival materials that has lost its prints. We only have letters between Tahoe and the buildings department, and we would include it because the entire letter is basically debating whether the container house have to remain as opposed to being demolished because it was an illegal construction. And then Tahoe was basically debating that, like, hey, this is actually sustainably very good, and at that point there was no notion of green building yet, and yet it has to be demolished in the end. So we want to be able to also show through documentation this kind of struggle and debate. Same goes for Unbuilt project by Tahoe and HKU students for the Metro Plan, which is basically a seed for what was going to happen with West Kowloon, as well as, really buying all these bricks that Jia Kun actually made during the Sichuan earthquake called Rebirth Bricks and making it into this panel. So yeah, just aspect of like materially, and also be able to find Suen Ho happens to be Tahoe's daughter, documentation or documentary footage of Kowloon Walled City before it was demolished. So we present this together with Ian Lambert's photograph and really going to show you can say the innards, I guess, of Kowloon Walled City, with the people selling everything from dim sum to like being dentists. And then also artwork is visual art was integrated in this exhibition, whether it's by Stanley Wong, another mountain man, of his photographs of half constructed buildings, Lanwei series, but also Arno Mick's documentation of like rooftop living in Hong Kong. So this is something that we actually kind of display them together, and to be able to say that art or visual artworks or what artists have to say about buildings are able to, provide a much more kind of like, just a much more reflective sense of architecture production than just a matter of showing the process materials. And so Tao Fei's work, even, talking about big money and big architecture during the Olympic boom period, was really part of her work as well. And how Gursky's photograph really focused on this kind of like money-making machine of a building and making it all transparent with all the people still working late at night. So it's just these things that we are able to also talk about architecture with these kind of works. So yeah, that's for building M+.
But I guess I see now why you're calling this the production of knowledge. I mean, in the process of uncovering the process work and stories, there's all these side stories and facts that are totally lost. It's basically everything that you've said that's not present on this page, but that are just as, that's really interesting. Just out of curiosity, is this knowledge that has been uncovered going to be, in this day and age and with the technology, searchable beyond the duration of the exhibition?
Great question. That's the thing about the lack of sustainability of exhibitions, right? Because they are such ephemera. They're a kind of ephemeral production. So of course we try at the moment, these things, every time we write a label for an object, or because that's actually you can say a distillation of many of our research. We often reuse them for blog for blog posts, for Instagram posts, for Facebook posts, and also for our publication. So our publication that is as a huge tome of collection highlights to be published when we open will contain some of these like major works and very long essays that each of us had to write about So in that sense, it's still a very conventional way of like disseminating information and keeping them as part of this more permanent repository. And so yeah, it will be in those form.
But if someone wanted to go back and look at the whole discussion or the various discussions and ideas that have popped up in all the different shows that the museum has or will curate, is there a central sort of like a Library of Congress terminal that I can go on and search, or is there a way of displaying the
So
thoughts or organizing the themes or building your own argument or perspective?
I think at the moment, for example, Winston, you mentioned that you checked out the In Search of Southeast Asia website on MPlus's website. At the moment, that is still our main repository of our, you can say, archive of events in the past. But in the future, there will be an institutional archive in the MPlus Research Center. So we have an institutional archivist who's been collecting all these different things, but at the same time, it's not going to be the same as reading a piece of article, because they're going to be, you know, just the documentation of things, but not necessarily the full story that is narrated. So yeah, I don't think, I guess in that way, it's not available in that full narration. You would have to kind of almost reconstruct them based on what's left of or traces of the past exhibitions. Yeah.
Yeah. I see.
After this, it was meant to go into the discourse a bit.
Well, yeah. Do you want to dive in?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Don't mind all these like fake structure at the back because we talked about it before. So so obviously, as much as I'm in part of MPlus, I also was thankful that I get to work on things that are outside of MPlus. So as you can see, the works that are what I'm doing in MPlus got to do with building the MPlus collection and their object focus. But I was very thankful that I had the chance to be able to do this project. That is to do with William Lim in Singapore, born in 1930. Okay, so this is the exhibition, Incomplete Urbanism at UCCA in Singapore. Just to mention the context of the venue, it's Ute Meta-Bauer is you can just Google her and then you'll see her as being the superstar curator of the contemporary art world. And she runs this space, she found this space, and she somehow, to my surprise, invited me to be able to do a show with her and also other contributors on this architect. Okay, so some of you may know, some of you may not know, not to confuse with the William Lim in Hong Kong. So William S.W. Lim obviously was born in Hong Kong, but he's a Singaporean architect and most known for being the co-founder of DP Architects. So DP Architects is a later name, but in the past it's called Design Partnership. It was found in the 60s, late 60s. And so I guess for me, as part of me being a historian, I was already looking at his materials for two things. Of course, the very key projects that he and his team was a part of, which is the People's Park Complex and Golden Mile Complex, but also him being part of a circle. At that point, it was called the Asian Pacific Architects Collaborative, APAC. And so this photo of him having steamboat at Tao Ho's house was what I got from Tao Ho's wife, Mrs. Ho, with Fumihiko Maki, Sumet Jumsai from Thailand, and William Lim and Tao Ho. So they were part of this circle where at that moment in the 80s, they were looking for, you can say, I'm not saying an Asian kind of like element, but really looking at like, okay, we have to address our own condition, our own kind of urbanism that is not just borrowing models from another place. And so that's their tenet. And so their works are often to do with that. And he's known to have wrote not just designed buildings, but really wrote a lot of books. And Incomplete Urbanism is one of the books that was published in 2011. And so Ute Meta-Bauer just wanted to be able to make a show about that. And what actually led to this book in 2011 actually began since the 50s. And so for my what I was interested in when I was talking to Ute was that I was already researching of his writings for a long time. And so I just want to share again images of what the exhibition is about. So she basically said, okay, Shirley, you are one of our contributors, but fortunately or unfortunately, what you have researched on will also be the backbone of how we lay out the exhibition, because you're presenting a much larger story about his practice, and then we'll insert it with different artists. So Mark Glode, for example, will be sharing films that are to do with urbanism and architecture in Asia. It's called Visual.
Wait. Sorry, can we just go back one slide?
Yes.
Can I just read this? Sorry,
yes,
just stay here for a second.
Yes.
We need an open system of incomplete urbanism which accepts conflicts, chaos, and complexity. Sounds very familiar to our current situation, as well as welcomes new knowledge, cutting-edge innovation, and unexpected progress. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so this is just again what Ute had chosen to highlight as what she thinks to be important, right? I think again, I think she's also very aware that Singapore was very much at that point, I guess she felt neat, organized, very planned. The idea of notion of complexity and chaos and conflict was not something that is often fully embraced. So she felt like, okay, we've got to push for this quote right at the entrance of the exhibition. But then the idea of quotes also kind of came about because this is a show about writings. It's about discourse. So William Lim is not just involved in a building, being part of the founder of DP Design Partnership, but also William Lim Associates later on. But it's really kind of involved very much with writing. Writing here began him as a correspondent of acoustics. So if those who actually know about the importance of acoustics as a journal by Doxiadis at that point, and it was based, there's a lot of Harvard connection because William basically went to GSD. And of course, that kind of like put him within this network of whether it's Maki and Jacqueline Turwitt. This is all in the late 50s. And so that whole network of like the Delos Symposium, acoustics, looking at urbanism and regionalism, I guess, and that's like place-based way of really planning for cities is very much part of the main tenet there. So for me, I was really like looking out for all these articles that he was a contributor to in acoustics and the covers to show that this is part of the world and themes that he was kind of like soaking in. And I wanted to be able to show that in the exhibition. And so, you know, like, so all these quotes about what acoustics is and really reflects his values, but it's not just William Lim talking. It's actually other people who are it's actually Doxiadis's quote and all that. So you can imagine it's a show about William Lim, but I wasn't really just showing him. I was showing the ideas in which he's influenced by, but also I was showing the articles that he wrote for different publications, but at the same time still showing what the publications generally are about. And so this is what I mean by a show focusing on the discursive elements of a practice, not just that goes beyond the design. And so these are just some of the ways. So again, I think NTU-UCCA team was amazing. They came up with an exhibition design that's much more open. Like, it's like a library almost, that you can just sit and look at the reading, and they're really against using original material. So everything was reproduced, but very clear in terms of what it's trying to show. And so the second theme about this was also about William Lim's kind of role in the arts and politics. And so he was the he was the founding editor of literary magazines, and Temasek was very highly political at that point as well. As much as he was also involved in a firm that built some of the very most important buildings in Singapore, like this Singapore Conference Hall. And so I was really, so I think that's the kind of focus that I was going for. And then that is both the building, but also the magazines that he was involved in. So these are just some images of that building and then the magazines. And then the third one was really him, again, being part of magazine making world. He was part of SPUR, which is like a Singapore Planning Urban Research Group with Tay Keng Soon and all the other architects. And then how, when they were actually writing about the cities and about what I mean by future Asian cities, they were also building the Golden Mile complex and the People's Park complex, which actually reflects those elements that they believe that an Asian city is a chaotic city, that you cannot just put everything in this very neat pockets. The market and the living all come together and meshed, you know. So that's the kind of like a vision that I felt like we are able to show that this is what was built, but this is what was written about, and they can come together to some degree. And then so these are just, again, images of like SPUR that you can read at that point, and then just images of, and then again, this is all very bookish. Again, this is only possible within a contemporary art center who really cares about ideas in that sense, and not so much just about the building. And so these are all the books that that William Lim had written or co-wrote or edited. That is all very consistent in its interest on Southeast Asia and what it means by being developing an alternative model for urban development, and not just a matter of being a copycat of the States or Europe, you know, but be able to come up with his own model. He really believed in that, and he kept writing a lot about that. And so these are just, again, I guess, again, the curatorial amazing of Uta, completely use the drawings and just bring them like a shower curtain. And so it's just like very soft use of fabric, even for the space, to be able to show this very kind of concrete kind of like drawing. And so, and then the fifth one would be this idea of the APAC that Tahoe was a part of. So it's called Asian Planning and Architecture Collaboration. And again, this group of people was actually encouraged by Jacqueline Turwitt. Again, Jacqueline Turwitt is if you know Siegfried Gideon, and she was pretty much like his secretary, not secretary, but like someone who actually put together his writing. So a very important figure, but often unknown just because she's female in that sense. But now everybody's kind of like realizing her role. So she's the one who encouraged Tao Ho, you know what, you're back in Hong Kong right now. Don't be discouraged that you're far from discourse. You can find people who are like you across Asia, and here are the people that I know. Connect with them, speak with them, meet with them, create discourse with them. And so it becomes something like this. And so even this issue of magazine called Progra, published by Koichi Nagashima, a Japanese process magazine, was really about the works of Sumet, William Lim, Tao Ho within an issue. So we really looked, so I was looking at that, but I was also looking at the buildings that they produced. So it was also a moment of POMO, a moment in which architects at that point, these are all, again, the deconstructive architecture of William Lim associates at that point, that they are similar, because Sumat Jumsai was also building that in the end. So this is just, again, the brochure that they came up together with, like-minded in that sense for practice, but also in terms of discourse. And then the last one is his William Lim's contribution to conservation. And so I was really bringing up how his involvement in discourse, but also in proposing new ideas of rehabilitation of Chinatown, but this one is particularly Clark Quay actually, was already envisioned, and engaging artists to be able to even envision what this rehabilitation could be for Pu Ye Tian. So Pu Ye Tian, like, you know, like not no night and day sort of like development, but it did not get built, but it was highly influential in influencing what URA was to propose for actually revamping you know, old Chinatown buildings, or like a dockyard, warehouses and all that. So again, it's just images. So again, and UCCA just reproduced the entire drawing with their super high power scan, and then just be able to make all these different things that are all from publications. They don't have real materials anymore, but it was still able to kind of bring it to life. And again, a lot of quotes. It's all about ideas. Not everyone is into this, but they were just believing in that. So I don't want to get too much, but Mimar was a very important magazine. Again, I'm a bit more of a historian. So in the 80s, this was the magazine that actually dealt with not just about America or like Europe, but really about Middle East, about South Asia, Southeast Asia, all the projects. This is the days without internet. And they were the first to write about all these projects that are in so-called the developing world. But then of course, at that point, the question is, now it's very questionable, what does the developing world actually meant? But at that point, they were the first one to champion all these different architects that were practicing in the other parts of the world that Domus will not be writing about, but they would. And so William Lim was part of this editorial board. And so it really believes in producing content that exemplify what's going on in Southeast Asia. So, and then the final one, it will be, again, he continues to be part of the AA Asia group as well, founded it and wrote a lot about it as well. Continues to really talk about Asian specificity and conditions in architecture up till today, AA Asia still exists. And so, yeah, this is that will be my third project, Winston.
Thanks for sharing. It's really great to get sort of the curator's perspective on the process, and I guess highlighting, it's almost like the director's cut of a movie, right? Your perspective on why these things are important and how they are related to us. As a layman, I always think of the museum, or I've always been interested in, I guess, curating as much as the work itself, because I think a lot of people associate the museum or as a place of authority when it comes to, you know, what gets placed into the museum. Like Duchamp's fountain, when it eventually made it into the museum, the decision to sort of show that places a certain value on intellectualization of that reused product. And in that sense, I wonder, you know, what you think, whether you agree or not. And I suppose that could also lead us into your next presentation, which is In Search of Southeast Asia, right? Reassigning some of that focus and that light onto topics that you think are important.
Yeah, I think Duchamp's example is, we were chatting beforehand. Duchamp's example was really about kind of as an artist. It was interesting because he, as an artist, because you were talking about the role of the curator, but I think for him, he was almost the curator, but also the artist. By making a work that is a found object into a kind of like possibly an art piece. He was already, you can say, proposing another way of looking. and in such a way that, of course, I'm sure he is able to convince some art critics and curators for it to be exhibited in that way. And it's like what you said, it influenced a whole other kind of like wave of the idea of the ready-made, right? And so yeah, so I think it has that role. But of course, I mean, what we are trying to do is, of course, not necessarily as conceptual as that. I think we are perhaps, as curators, a little bit closer to concepts or approaches about how we consider society, how we consider identity, how we consider place. So I guess the next exhibition that on Southeast Asia is to do with that.
But what I mean is the museum, you know, a collection of things that are important, or is it actually creating, attributing importance to objects?
I think it's
that you
both.
decide to show.
It has to be both. There are some things that you can say that the people or the public do not consider as important. There are some things. So they will ask things like, why do you acquire? Some people will ask, why do you acquire Ai Weiwei, for example, right? Whereas another group of people say, oh, Ai Weiwei should be part of your collection, right? Or why do you acquire architects that are of non-entities, like no idea who they are? Like, why do you acquire them? You know, so, but then at the same time, why do you acquire someone as so-called famous but not belonging to Asia, like Archigram? You know, like, so there's always questions, right? So we have to be almost very clear about our rationale and our values in what we acquire, whether it's something that is acknowledged by people or something that people are against. So it's both. So we have to kind of, address both. And all of that, if there is a common ground to that, that will be our remit and our tenet, our beliefs about what M+ should be, right? And what Hong Kong is as well. So it's both. I think if you just go by if you just focus on one thing, you'll be a people pleaser. Right? If you just go by the things that people already think as important, and only that, you'll be complete people pleaser and some degree, not really questioning conventions. Right? Okay. But if you go the other route where I'm just going to collect things that nobody knows about, you know, I'm just going to purely go for historian, then you're also being kind of like you're not really engaging anything that people already care about. Right? So you have to address both.
So maybe tell us about the next one, which is In Search of Southeast Asia. How did that come into focus for you?
So I guess to some degree, so let me just share this very little trailer, if I can.
Local expertise was as competent and their design
So I think that, oh, sorry. Okay. So this trailer that I'm sharing here, I think it was very important for us. It's actually the first time that we make an exhibition trailer. Before that, exhibitions don't have a trailer yet for M+, but we thought this has to have one because we want to tell people that it's going to be very diverse medium. And in some ways, it's very hard to communicate a place like a region of Southeast Asia without the use of moving images and this kind of like collapsing of multiple worlds. And so we have to make this. And so I just want to share that when you're working in an institution, there are some agendas that need to be communicated. And of course, the agenda that is often not clear about M+ is that, are we a museum just about Hong Kong or more? And at that point, of course, that's one reason. And the second reason is because my specialty happens to be looking into Southeast Asia, and we happen to be collecting, we have collected a bunch of materials. And then my other colleague, Pauline Yao, the lead curator for visual art, also has focused on Southeast Asia and collected also a group of works. So if we were to look at our collection, there's actually substantial representation of this region that be able to make into a show that is good enough for a show. That is, of course, at that point, at the M+ Pavilion, it wasn't that big. It's only about 320 square meters. And so in that sense, they are two-pronged, yeah? One prong is because we have to assert who we are. We are not just an institution that is dealing with Hong Kong and mainland China, but we are also to do with this larger region. And the other one is that we have also began collecting it as part of what we think is our greater remit. So that was the reason why it came together. Just to introduce. So I brought up this as an example as well, Winston. I told you that I brought up the word interdisciplinarity in the first slide. Very important. It was kind of tested and tried it was tested at the Building and Plus exhibition where we included visual artworks. But this show is more than just putting art and architecture together, but putting it together in a way that ensured that a particular theme gets illuminated. So there are particular themes about the region that we really want to bring out, but it happens to also be reflected by the works that we acquired. And so I will also share about how that approach came about. And then the other one that is very key about this project was the idea of flow. So I mentioned again in my first slide, knowledge production here means being very aware of the network of objects, agents, and ideas. That come across through, like, that is not just something that, like, okay, this is the border here, right here, but people just kind of influence each other across the border. So we want to be able to bring that out as well. So this is the text. Again, you had read this in the website. I just kind of like highlighted the ones that are in blue. As you can see, thankfully, I'm able to be quite consistent with my approach. Again, me and Pauline are very alike in our narrative, and I mean in our kind of curatorial priorities. So some of these words, we co-wrote this text together, the idea of individual perspectives, micro-histories, but also about overarching narratives, and the idea of complicating the notion of a homogeneous Southeast Asia and be able to point to a wider sense of geography and conversation that are outside of the region. And so that's all very key, and to think more broadly, to look closely, and to be able to think of the region as something, to think about the region in a way that would help you to think of Hong Kong as part of a larger world, and not just Hong Kong as part of East Asia or mainland, like your counterpart is larger than that. So there was a kind of like our, you can say hidden, it's not really hidden message, but that was what we believe, that this show is important because if people were to ask why M+ does a show about Southeast Asia, we want to be able to say that Hong Kong is also more than just East Asia and mainland China. It was solidly, historically part of Southeast Asia before China opened up. And so your world is larger than just this world or this territory that you're thinking about. So that's our motivation as well. And so that's more of the kind of like, you can say the conviction behind the show. Again, just the kind of works, again, we don't have a full, extensive, comprehensive sort of collecting approach. We don't believe in being an encyclopedic museum. We believe in collecting based on particular narratives and particular works that really speak a particular moment. And so these are the kind of geographies that are represented nationality-wise. But again, you would realize that these nationalities kind of break down, like when we talk about the work itself, because the ideas are from a lot of other places. And so after looking at all these works, we kind of basically, okay, I should start with this screen. This screen is, you can say, ignore all the themes at the top. We began with just analyzing all the works and just seeing what do they address. So the words that are in blue is exchange of ideas, people and objects, colonialism, post-colonial independence, resistance, materiality, local archetypes, informal urbanism, national survival strategy, global artistic language. All this comes when we analyze the works, it becomes all these blue words came up. And when all these blue words came up, the 3 topics came up. And that's how we divide the work. And we realized that when we actually focus on the theme, we realized that the art objects and the architectural objects actually enrich our understanding of this notion of conditions of place. So this is what we meant by how, I guess, for the first time, an exhibition is able to say that, actually interdisciplinary is so important, because if we only do an architecture show on Southeast Asia, you would not be able to really talk about it in its full extent, in its complexity. But when you're able to put this together, you're actually able to bring it out a lot more. And so that's how we are able to come up with these 3 sections in the end. And I just want to highlight the ones in highlights are the architectural works, whereas design, product design, graphic design was also part of it, but majority are really the architectural works. So just wanted to show you some, again, when we enter the show, it's a very small space, but when we enter the show, we want to be able to show a film about the idea of the so-called the real people of Singapore that are actually not from Singapore, but they are actually a particular part of Indonesia, to be able to complicate who is originally from Singapore, right? It's not just from Singapore. Singapore and Malaysia, Indonesia are really part of one kind of like land, or water even. And the idea of water is very important, because Southeast Asia is pretty much a region that is connected by these waters as much as it's by land. And so how a film is able to bring that out, and the feeling of being in the tropics was very key, whether it's the use of cane or rattan by Sophie Pitch. But then next door to it, on the right here, it will be the works that are related to architecture. So this is just, again, some of the films that are there. but next to it will be this. So this is where all, again, architectural works are often flat and models. They're not of great variety in that sense. So the way it's displayed naturally requires it to be displayed, you know, in a particular way. You have to respect that a print is a print, and you have to make sure that light doesn't go on it and all that. So it still occupies a different place, but it is still in dialogue with the artworks that are on the left side and with the film. And so these are basically the whole topic on tropical regionalism begins here. Everything from Paul Rudolph to Woha architects to Ken Young in Malaysia are all here. So again, and also the archive of Budi Edwards and Partners from Malaysia. Again, this is one of the very earliest firm that was very much a part of nation building in Malaysia and Singapore, Malayan architects. So again, the very first tropical houses, again, it could be in California as well, but these were all in Malaysia and Kuala Lumpur as well as in Singapore. And also just being able to find what is a Sri Lankan architect doing in Southeast Asia. But hey, that's the fact. Jeffrey Bawa was invited to Bali to be able to build a resort, and that really set almost a typology for resort design in the 70s. And so these are the material that I was able to stumble upon in Colombo, really just seeing like the catalog for the resort investment, and also all his research photographs, and being able to see, I only visited the building, and the only remaining genuine one from the 70s in Bali. On the right here are my photographs of the resort of Batu Jimbar, one of the villas, and just amazed to see that these are the research photographs and how he really transposed kind of like a barn house into a living room with like cellars, with like, you know, different terraces and all that. So it's just a wonderful way of how he kind of transforms it. And also his own study of the material. These are all sketches that are in the catalog, but in his photographs, you could tell that he was really looking at the material and the scale of things and the use of objects, because you can know that Jeffrey Bawa doesn't just design spaces, but he designs exactly where an artwork is placed within a room. And so it's down to that detail. So we were able to find, and so yeah, so just that's the example of Bawa's work, Rudolph's work, again, as mentioned before, Ken Young, Woha, again, dealing with tropical regionalism as part of this first section of conditions of place alongside the artworks. And so the next section was, again, nation building was very important, and the role of the state. Again, post-colonial independence isn't something that is of importance to a museum like MoMA or VNA. But for M+, we thought this notion of post-colonial independence is very key. Architects and artists were driven by this moment of independence, especially in the 50s and the 60s. And who are they? What did they do? And so we pretty much, these archives got me into trouble because people felt like, oh my gosh, you're starting to take away stuff from our nation, which is Malaysia and Singapore. And I said, but no one else is collecting it in Malaysia and Singapore. So I'm sorry, I just took it first. And so, but these are all gifts, you know, they're all donations. I don't pay for them. They're all out of generosity and trust of the donor to really let us acquire these archives. It's like, yeah, really just photographs, you know, and ephemera drawings. And of course, so we would place this archive table, again, thanks to Collective, who designed this amazing archive table that's able to show slides, movies, and you know, come up with a new way of framing double side acrylic frames for the works. And yeah, placed next to Charles Lim, this whole big film here is about Charles Lim's investigation of water channels in Singapore, including the sewage channels, but also the leaves that he collects from the sewage. We were able to kind of hang them and bring them to Hong Kong. And again, of course, we started off with this poster to remind people, guys, Southeast Asia was very much part of Vietnam. Vietnam was part of French colony. Indonesia was part of Dutch colony, Singapore part of, so just to remind people, you know, don't forget. I know that Hong Kong is already a post-colonial kind of thing. Okay, Hong Kong was a late colony, and so just remind, we have the same fate. And so, yeah, just again, images of the very first kind of building. They are very key in Shenton Way, Singapore's first early central business district, and how this firm, MAC or 83, had really formed the shape of this CBD. And then again, Charles Lim's film about sewage. Kiri Delina was just really a protest, an image of protest, and that's part of the idea of the power of the state in like clamping people down. And so we were able to include this work as part of that conversation. And Bas Prinson's photograph of the oil petrol storage that is dug really deep underneath in Singapore and make a lot of money for the government. And so it's just showing how the national survival strategy for Singapore through this photograph. So that's how, and Budi Edwards, you know, influencing what was happening in Brunei, using really this brutalist kind of aesthetic for Malaysia's university and airport. So again, all these projects are not known. You can't really find them online, but we were just really thankful that people were able to share this with us in Malaysia. And again, the discourse of identity in Malaysia or Malaya at that point was very key. Yeah, again, as a historian, I look into documents and not just drawings and discourse. Architects really debating what identity is in an issue of PETA. That was the journal for the Malaysian Institute of Architects. And also looking at drawings that were like, you know, the first Hilton has had to have this Minangkabau roof. You know, it's just showing like, you know, how Malaysian identity is kind of like associated to particular forms, but at the same time, there are people that are like this that do not really consider the idea of identity as an issue at all. So to show that diversity as well. Again, these are just some of the images of works by Malayan Architects Partnership. The very first bank for DBS, Singapore Conference Hall, Jurong Town Hall. Again, mosque that are designed by Chinese, the very last mosque designed by a Chinese or a non-Muslim near Kuala Lumpur. So we made a model out of it as well. And then the very key banks. Again, it could look very much like, you know, Boston City Hall. So it's just like a very, you know, this is all happening in Malaysia in the 60s. You know, people would just like wonder how, but it did happen. So the last section of this, which is very much what I said about transcending borders, is that these artists are very much, yes, they are born and living in Southeast Asia, but their works are really addressing something across the board. And so we included some works by, of course, by Wilson, and it's great that we have this work because Wilson was pretty much addressing how Wong Kar-wai's films were all set in Southeast Asia. Right, and so whether it's like, you know, so all these illustrations are really based on what was also depicted in the film, and so he kind of like further assert that in these drawings. And also a film by Burmese Taiwanese filmmaker, and also this film was really about what it means for Burmese workers in Taiwan. And the Taiwan, you see the ship over there on the right, it's actually a jumbo restaurant boat that came from Hong Kong and parked in Kaohsiung. So it's just this whole idea, like people are just like mixed, you know, they just ideas travel, objects travel. And also some of the key designers here will be Sumat Jumsai on the left, the robot building. If you've been to Bangkok, it is the very first high-rise in the 80s of Sathorn district. And then the Theseus Chan on the right is really a graphic designer based in Singapore, but is already working with Comme des Garçons and all designers across the globe. And so it's just really about like, yeah, sure, you're a Singaporean, but you don't really consider yourself a Singaporean designer, or Southeast Asian. You're being part of a larger global language and production and discourse of fashion and design. And so this is just an example. And of course, Rick Rit, we have Rick Rit's work, and Rick Rit is an example of that, Argentinian born, but a Thai, based in the States. And his language of design, of art was really, it's more about a global art discourse as well. So again, these are just some examples of how Sumat was really an example of an architect based in Southeast Asia, but he really has this idea like, I'm trying to make the machine something into more living, more human. So it's really more than just what, he's a big fan of Corp, but he would go beyond what Corp is also asserting about the machine for buildings. And so these are, again, some of his, again, I mean, people have very different ideas about it, but we love Pomo because there's a reason why Pomo is Pomo. And it was really the ideas and the boldness of making it happen. Even if people was to disagree with it, there was an embrace of difference, of even contradiction at that period. And that to us is very important to kind of capture in the collection. We have also archival photographs of Buckminster Fuller's involvement in Southeast Asia through figures like Sumat Jumsai, as well as Lim Chong Kiat, again, another Malaysian Singaporean architect, and what he did in Southeast Asia and how Bali had really formed his thinking about a world in which civilization could possibly start from Southeast Asia, and be able to think about the dome, the geodesic dome, as part of something that is universal and not just, you know, belonging to the techno kind of like a centric world of Europe and the States, but really part of this greater vernacular, even in Southeast Asia. And so I also looked at the letters and the notes taken by Sumat Jumsai and how he was influenced by Buckminster Fuller, and how Buckminster Fuller's idea also influenced his book. This is a very key book called Naga, Cultural Origins and Siam, which is the same idea, how civilization's birth could possibly come from this water-based technology and world of Southeast Asia, where which actually includes Japan, because they have the same kind of like stilt housing. So he was just analyzing these aspects based on what Bucky think to be the idea of the world beginning from this part as opposed to elsewhere. Again, photographs of him about the dome being built by the US Embassy in Bangkok as part of the Cold War diplomacy. And also, again, so I end there. These are the stuff that were in the Southeast Asia show, but I just wanted to show two works that we almost wanted to include, but we couldn't. The first one was Archigram's design for the for the Malaysia Pavilion at Commonwealth Institute in London. And so this we couldn't include because of all the controversy of not being able to bring the works out of UK into Hong Kong, but we would have included this. We were surprised when we found out about this exhibition that they did, but it really shows, this kind of like a neo-colonial perspective of Malaysia being this humid kind of tropical country, because in the exhibition, he actually designed a Malaysia simulator. So pretty much a very primitive way of bringing hot air, humid air with like multimedia projections of Malaysia. And also this work that we couldn't include in time, but I stumbled upon it when I visited the artist Navin Rawanchaikul. So it's actually a comic strip. Again, it's made of 48 pages of illustrated pages. So if you know this exhibition called Cities on the Move in 1999, it's like a groundbreaking exhibition done by Ho Han Ru and Hans Ulrich Obrist about the Asian urbanism being the core of artists' work, and also including architects and all that. And so this exhibition, this drawing was meant to be published as part of the comic strip for the Bangkok version of Cities on the Move, but they couldn't find enough funding to publish it in time. So he only had these drawings that are incomplete, but the story is amazing. It's exactly what we wanted to say about the robot building by Sumet Jumsai and the notion of POMO. POMO architecture at that point. One is this neoclassical kind of like Louvre, LV, they call it the LV tower because it's trying to go into this like kind of like fake Italian sort of a dome-esque tower. But then there's one that is a Sumet Jumsai's robot building that doesn't try to be, faking Euro classical architecture, but just, the idea of the form itself being completely driven by the narrative of a subject, a figure as a robot. And so to the artists like Navin and Rikrit, they felt like this is still the kind of signature building for Thailand, for Bangkok, over these other copycats, And so the story here is about the victory of robot building over this Medusa occupied tower. So these are just some of the comic strip that I show you. We'll be showing it in the opening display, all 40 of them. And the story about the building also was the story of how the Bangkok Biennale for Cities on the Move came about. So Rikrit will appear in the comic strip, Hans Ulrich Obrist, as well as Ole Shirin are all part of the cast, I guess you can say. So basically the story is the taxi driver was let blood, like sacrifice his blood, and then the blood actually brought robot building to life in the future and managed to defeat this other dome-esque LV tower building, where Medusa lives, and then rescue his wife or his girlfriend, and then it ended up being a victory. So yeah, it's a very kind of like a trivial narrative, but we thought, oh my gosh, this is how the artists actually view a building like the robot building. So again, this is an example of how other people mediate architecture and put it as part of their cultural imagination and their own narrative in that sense that we also want to bring up. That ends.
That's amazing. Thank you. I really look forward to that, seeing that.
I'm like, how do you view 40 drawings in one?
I want to know who the girlfriend is.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the story. But thanks guys for listening in.
Yeah. So this is, this is a really great and optimistic way of embracing multiplicity, and it's great that you guys are showing this. Because otherwise it's often underrepresented, work from this region or work from this period.
Yeah, I think, again, I have to say that collecting it's not a science. It's a lot of serendipity in it. So when people ask us, why don't you include this, all these things, like, do you know how hard it is to acquire anything? Sometimes when they come to us, like they are either like beyond a particular figure, or like sometimes we've been trying so hard to find it, we couldn't find it, like Sito Wai's archive, like in Hong Kong, like you know, like the daughter doesn't allow us access to it. It's just like, no way. And then why don't you have C2Y in your archive, you know, but cannot find. But this one is just like yeah, it was a fortunate find, and can't predict a lot of what we collect sometimes. Yep. Yeah.
Okay, so that I think wraps the presentation portion. We now have about probably 20 or so minutes for discussion, and I'd like to open it for questions. Let's see. Okay, so the first question from David Lieberman. Thank you for your infectious enthusiasm and rigorous scholarship across a remarkable range of architecture. Yes, I second that. In pursuit of narratives and evolution speculative ideas, have you as curator considered authoring texts as a novelist in furtherance of the fictive archaeologies of yet to be written future histories? This is the energy and possibility promised by contemporary thought and practice. It has been many years since I visited Hong Kong. I look forward to M+ as an important voice of discourse of global urbanism and creative cultural production. Wow, thank you, David.
Thanks.
Shirley?
I just wanted to say that the idea of fictive archaeology, some writers are able to write like that. I think, you know, someone like Mark Wigley, you know.
Sorry, for someone like me who doesn't understand, what is fictive archaeology?
Okay, David could he can define it. Maybe I may see it in a different way, but okay, so maybe he may not define it, but fictive. So I guess I just kind of hone into the word fictive versus fictive in terms of writing future histories. Okay, so even that idea itself, I have to say, I am quite an evidence-based writer, so that's just me. But I think there are other writers who are able to really be able to write like that. You know, so for me, you can say that it's quite dry, quite conventional as a historian. But yeah, I'm still based on speculating or projecting a particular narrative based on these evidence and writing it as though what actually happened then, based on the information I have of the context then. So I'm not very good at imagining futures in that way. So I would leave it to other kinds of authors or historians. So yeah. So yeah, I would. So that's one of the questions, right? Yeah.
Yep.
But thank you for supporting us from afar. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess. So again, back to my question. I mean, what happens to all the work and the thinking behind the curatorial thinking behind each of these pieces? Because I mean, yes, I was able to read the piece about the Southeast Asia, In Search of Southeast Asia, but that's because you sent me a link. If I were to actually come across it, then it's quite a few layers down into the website. So if someone wanted to, if the public wanted to access the body of knowledge or the body of discussion that was generated over the process of curating something, right? Maybe through looking at that archive, they would be able to determine other narratives that could be quite interesting. But how would they go about sort of?
So yeah, I mean,
way to
I think I
engage that.
I should bring this up to our institutional archivist because I mean, right now people are all wondering, you know, how does a particular show in MoMA in 1940 whatever, you know, came together? And if you were to Google some of these things, the press release can be found online. But that's the extent to which you can get something or information.
You almost have to know what you're looking for to search it.
Yeah, but you can also go to the research center. So same thing. So we have a research center where these things are present. But at the moment, will Ang Harriet, you know, our archivist, have my notes about how I came up with the 3 sections for Southeast Asia? How? I don't think she would have that information. She will only take what is perhaps the output of the exhibition, but not the process per se. I think she hasn't really asked us on that detail yet because so far we are still busily trying to open the museum, and at the moment we are working on one level of building the archive. Institutional archive is mostly making sure that the output are together, but the thought process, there's just so much. Yeah, it's hard to bring it all out. Yeah. But of course, the collection highlights, you know, has, again, as I mentioned, very extensive writings about why a work is in the collection. You know, what is the key narratives that actually became drivers for us to acquire particular materials. It's all there. So yeah, it's like a 500-page book. So So yeah, that would have a lot of information for you.
Sorry, where is this 500-page book?
It will be published on at the time when we open, so end of the year. Yeah.
Okay.
Both in Chinese and in English. So it's I mean, two different separate publication, English and Chinese, but yeah, it's massive. So, and we will put a lot of blood and sweat on it.
I look forward to that. Okay, let's see. There's another question from, apologies if I don't get your name correctly, Kanokan Trakliring Shalawin. Will there be any project, research, book, publication, or otherwise, about different perspectives of the points that you brought them to the light? I think.
Yeah, I think again.
Yeah, I think it's about the book, right?
Yeah, the collection highlights will be the best to address that, because it's going to come from curators that are from the different disciplines. So not just, and then, there'll be, like, for example, there'll be an essay about why we think Pomo in Asia is something worth looking into. When Pomo as a narrative was like all set and dismissed and condemned, perhaps. But for us in Asia, we believe that it had another kind of life. So what are the examples of the works that perhaps address that? So yeah, that it will all, and if we were to collect Hong Kong architecture and urbanism, what are the works that are in there? What are the thinking behind it? Why are they important? They are all in the essays that I wrote. So, and all the other curators who address other topics would have written.
I think that's really key to as we increasingly search to understand and build a picture of our identity as a city. It's really key to understand, the stories and motivations behind a lot of the work that we see growing up without really knowing why.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, I think identity is so such a kind of like contentious thing, but I think increasingly it's important to keep it porous, because we are porous. I think when identity is fixed, or transfixed, I guess, in that sense, it's often politicized. It's often due to pride. It's often due to a kind of nationalism or territorialism. But if we actually admit that our identity is changing and always shaped by many different factors, or different places even, I think that's reality. That's humanity. So yeah, it just depends how we want to position ourselves as part of a greater thing, or just I am, or my place is the center of the world. So. I mean, naturally, a lot of us in the team believes more in the first idea that we hold no authority, I guess, in just one thing. So yeah,
the multiplicity that you talked about, right?
Yeah, I think again, I take it as a stance of humility to know that you don't know everything and that you're part of a larger thing. So it's. But again, of course, the idea of authority as a museum, you still need authority to be able to say what is what, right? So that's where you need to have thought about it, thoroughly investigated, have evidence to say why you have that position of something, about something. Yeah, so keeping it porous, but at the same time, kind of like have a sense of clarity. So
it's incredible. I mean, listening to you talk, I now have a sort of mental map. It's almost like every piece of work is speaking to you with the stories and the background stories and the process and how it's created. And it's amazing that you can sort of craft a narrative or a focus while carrying such a wide collection in the back of your mind.
I think it's just the beginning. I don't think we have to start somewhere. So those narratives are just what I have started. But I think in the end, none of us are going to be here forever. And if somebody else come into the team, look at the same work, but have a different view, it could be, and it should be, right? So I think we want. That's why I think whenever we acquire something, we actually have to bring up what are the different issues in which this work will actually reflect or address. The more, the better, because then it's also becoming this thing that is moldable into various ways in which it could fit into various kinds of storytelling that you can't predict. So yeah, we try to encourage that sort of open and broad way of like interpreting things. Yeah. So yeah.
I think there's in Shanghai now, they have curatorial sort of competitions each year, right? They host an open competition for curators to come and submit ideas and then whatnot. So it's sort of opening up this idea of curating these narratives in a sort of, there's a dialogue now between what previously is perceived to be a very much closed sort of circle that sort of thinks through these things. Does N+, is there a program in N+ that sort of looks at that, or what is your thinking on
I think again we are still in this opening, you can say opening mode, right? Where when something opens or just is establishing itself for even to some people 10 years is not a lot. To some people it's like, oh my God, it's forever, but it's actually not a lot. For a museum to try to build something for a decade, it's not really, I mean, a serious museum, it takes time. So because of that, I think we have not collaborated extensively with other institutions or even individuals, partly because we still believe that we need to master the content that we build. And master here just doesn't mean like we conquer it in that sense. I'm just saying like we need to understand it and need to know how to articulate it and see what are the mediums in which it could be represented. So we need to kind of tackle that, or else why do we, because you don't just acquire things, you have to almost think about how do you want to present this, and this takes time, whether it's a book, an exhibition, or a film. So in a way, we are still in that mode of trying to really work on it because of what we have acquired. But in the future, I'm sure there will be something that will be open up, that there are other venues of creating content or exhibitions that would be co-authored or authored by somebody else. Yeah. I think it's just the nature of institutional building, right? In the beginning, you really try to, I guess you can say, be involved in it in a more 100% sort of way. Yeah. Yeah.
Follow-up question from Kanawan. Could you explain a bit about the reason why N+ acquired? Okay, so here's the Archigram collection.
Sure.
How does it link to the center point of N+? Do you think there's any linkage between Southeast Asia and the avant-garde movement in Europe?
Yeah, I think a very common question and important one. People may accept it or not accept it, but I'll just share. First of all, I think we can look at Archigram archive primarily from, the reason why we acquire it primarily is from two angles. One is that, three reasons. One angle is that it's a pragmatic thing. Okay, I'll leave the pragmatic to the last. So the first one is that we are Hong Kong, we are a museum of visual culture. So for us to acquire Archigram archive, we not only have to it's not about box ticking either, but it is an important thing as an architecture collective. But it was also the nature of the archive is highly to do with popular culture. They are magazines. They're not even buildings. They are like ideas. They use animation. They use exhibitions. And so we see Archigram's influence really historically as well. If you're talking about its influence in terms of design and architecture and urbanism, may not be, but one thing that you cannot deny is influence is how architecture is mediated and communicated and represented. It's about representation. How do you dream? How do you project? Like that sort of a projective sort of influence. And so on that level, so the Museum of Visual Culture naturally believes that the Archigram archive was more than an architectural thing. It's really more about a media, a graphic thing, a filmic thing, so even artistic practice, it's not actually just purely architecture. So that's one reason why we acquired it, because we're not just purely, we think that Archigram archive speaks to other disciplines that we care about as well. The other one is, of course, we don't acquire Archigram because it is a London-based practice, but also got to do with the fact that it has dialogue with what's going on with this part of the world. Okay, of course, we are able to consider that the idea of future cities, the idea of like the expandable or expandable city is something that even architects in Japan were also talking about. And so we often acquire things that represent particular ideas or explorations that are reflected by practices in this part of the world. And so whether it's, we also realize that people like Ma Yan Song, so again, not everybody is like that kind of practices, but there are practices here that also have or taken on that sort of approach of the imaginary city in that sense, so that's and also the notion of the instant city, like if we're going down the concept, Hong Kong or Asia being an instant city, a city that kind of like just functions, based on a particular event. It's not coming from Archigram per se, but the phenomenon is reflected in where we are. And so there are several ways in which we can find affinities in that sense. Again, I'm not saying that it's a science, but these are the reasons why. But of course, if I want to bring up the pragmatic here just meant an institutional. Okay, so every institution who builds a museum, you need anchor archive, anchor holdings, anchor works. And so it's very rare for an architect or practice, right, who have already diligently kept cataloging their archive over decades. And Archigam is one of them. Obviously, it could have been MoMA, it could have been VNA who gotten it, but of course, it's also got to do with like the resources of the museum to be able to afford a particular kind of archive that is just ready for us to acquire. And so that's just, yeah, all these different factors, you know, just kind of put together, made, again, and of course, Archigam being the most critical bunch of, you know, gentlemen. They could have completely rejected us, but somehow it was over the years, Arik Chen was able to build that trust for the archive to come to Hong Kong. But it's still complicated, you know, because they're still unsure about what M+ is, you know, so it was all a risk for both sides. But I think we all are more focused about what we can do with the material now than regretting or whatever that is. It's more important that we got it and we are going to make use of it, bring new meaning to it, bring practitioners to look at the archive and come up with new ideas, new interpretations, new applications even. So that's more of our goal. Yeah, that's it. Hope that addresses. David has another question. Could be both. It could be both, David. So the question here is whether a museum could be a cabinet of curiosities, or the other one is like the idea of this, you know, kind of left on the cell, like a Saint Jerome, you know, like I think it's both. But of course, I think it could be both. I think the museum going experience that we aim for, at least our team, we look for the swimmers, the divers, you know, like. So people who scan and just want to look at many things, you know, they don't want to think too much. But we hope also that there's some content are for the geeks, right? They can go deep into something and wonder. So the research center could be a place for that. Whereas the display itself would still cater to a wide audience of just, you know, curious viewers, but they don't necessarily want to go into the depth of it. So yeah, I think there should be different ways of interfacing with the works and the display. And that, I think we should aim for that. Yeah, different ways of accessing.
I'm interested in the deep end of that. So how is M+ or is M+ going to be different in sort of providing that access to people?
I think so. I have to say that of course there are not much you can say unconventional ways of running a research center. So whether it's what CCA is doing and what the VNA RIBA library is doing, or, you know, like they're all, or even different, you know, Harvard Francis Loeb library is doing, you know, they're all similar in that sense, right? They're still make an appointment, you know, tell us what you want to see, and then we'll show you the materials, you know. So the conventions have to be there because these materials are not just for fun. You can't just like flip open it and touch it, you know, like it's, yeah, we are being stewards of materials here from donors who trust us. So we have to put in place rules for this to be accessed. So that's one. I think if it's in terms of like unconventional, like, you know, like I guess pushing or trying to be a bit more like new in our thinking of how we bring access, is really more of what I would always use the example of what CCA is doing. So CCA is allowing not just historians, but architects and designers to come and see their collections, even if they're not cataloged. But it's very exclusive, so meaning that very planned and very careful. So they would pick out particular files, they would open it, and they would be able to write a blog about it, write an essay about it, and it's part of their, you know, their program. And I think that would be, I think it's very kind of like a quite stimulating, inspiring model, because now, I mean, after Bartlett invited me to run through the architectural archive for their year ones to look at the archive from Southeast Asia, and they were like amazed, or they were asking questions that I never thought about. And so for me, I'm like, okay, I think we should really try to bring particular practitioners and look at particular things and talk about it and create content from it. Because in a way, to activate an archive in a much more, you know, less passive sort of way, you know, is really down to like a very specific way of engagement that leads to a very specific output. And I think that's what I think my colleagues and I are hoping to be able to design or plan, and having particular partnerships with particular institutions or schools, and really looking at how the archive can illuminate particular subjects, as opposed to it being like broad open, you know. So yeah, that's just, I think, yeah, not yet planned to the detail, but I think we are thinking about it. Yeah. So open to, I think we're just open to this kind of a collaboration about how we can activate this. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think that was the last question. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Shirley. It was a pleasure seeing the content, and I really look forward to the opening of the book, and I'll ask you about the archive question again in a few years.
Yes, hopefully, yeah, hopefully it's, yeah, there are many things unknown also. We know something's going to happen, but there's also a lot of unknown, but that's part of it, part of life. And so, yeah, but for now, we hope that, I guess, this foundation that we set will be able to communicate some of the key things about the region and about Hong Kong, I think. Yeah. So, and about the discipline. Yeah. But thank you for having me. So yeah, and all the questions, a few questions, but it's okay. Thanks, Winston, again for the interest. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, we shall switch off.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Bye,
all right.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye.